Before skyscrapers, before bulldozers, before Google Maps, there were pyramids, massive stone triangles rising from the desert, built with zero tech and infinite ambition. So how exactly did ancient Egyptians build these jaw-dropping wonders from scratch? So picture this. You're a pharaoh, top of the food chain, gold everywhere, snakes on sticks, people bowing like it's your job. You've got absolute power, but also a ticking clock. One day, your mortal body will quit, and you've got to be ready to go full god mode in the afterlife. And that's where the pyramid comes in. You see, these pyramids weren't just fancy tombs. They were soul launch pads, literal resurrection machines. The ancient Egyptians believed that when a pharaoh died, their spirit, called the Ka, needed a proper vessel to begin its eternal journey. And a mud brick hut wasn't going to cut it. So the idea was simple, but ridiculously ambitious. Build something huge, permanent, and shaped like the sun's rays. Why? Because the pyramid was seen as a staircase to the heavens. That sharp triangle wasn't just aesthetic, it was symbolic. Every block was a spiritual stepping stone, guiding the pharaoh upward to merge with Ra, the sun god himself. But it wasn't just spiritual, it was political. The bigger the pyramid, the more divine you looked while you were alive. It screamed power, order, and don't even think about overthrowing me, peasant. It was also a job creator. Building pyramids kept thousands of workers busy, loyal, and fed. So no, it wasn't just a massive pile of rocks in the sand. It was propaganda. It was theology. It was an eternal flex. And once the pharaoh made the call, build my pyramid, the countdown began. So pharaohs got the vision. Now what? Time to pick real estate. And we're not talking about beachfront property. This isn't HGTV. This is ancient Egypt, and location was everything. You don't just plop a pyramid anywhere. First rule, west bank of the Nile, always. That's where the sun sets. And in Egyptian belief, that's where the dead go to rest. The west wasn't just a compass direction, it was spiritual Jeep. The land of the setting sun was the land of the afterlife. So if you built your pyramid on the east bank, instant bad vibes. Totally unacceptable. Next consideration, proximity to the Nile. You needed easy access to transport materials, tons of limestone, granite, tools, food, even workers. By boat, no Nile access. That's like trying to build a skyscraper in the desert without roads. Impossible. Then came the terrain. You needed solid bedrock, because a pyramid weighs, well, an absurd amount. We're talking 6.5 million tons for the Great Pyramid of Giza alone. If you built on soft sand, congrats, you've just made a lopsided tomb that's going to collapse before the pharaoh even dies. Also, let's be real, visibility mattered. This wasn't just a private project, it was the ultimate flex. You wanted your pyramid to be seen from miles away, glowing in the desert sun, with a polished white casing that could blind a camel at high noon. This thing had to dominate the skyline like a golden exclamation point. So once the priests, architects, and royal geometers scoped out the perfect patch of land, secure, symbolic, shippable, the first stone was metaphorically rolled into place. Because before you can build the afterlife, you've got to pick where it begins. All right, pharaohs got the land, but you can't just start stacking rocks and call it a day. You need a blueprint fit for a god. Because remember, the pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a stairway to eternity, an advertisement for immortality, and a math problem that made future archaeologists cry. First up, orientation. These pyramids weren't randomly plopped down. The sides of the Great Pyramid at Giza are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west, like eerily perfect. So precise, some conspiracy theorists still believe aliens did the measuring. But no, just ancient Egyptians with plumb bobs, sighting rods, and the night sky. They used stars, especially the circumpolar ones, which never set, to find true north. These weren't primitive people guessing in the sand. They had astronomy, geometry, and serious swag. Then came the sacred math. The slope of the pyramid, what we now call the seked, had to be just right. Too steep, it collapses. Too flat, it's a glorified sandhill. So they used ratios, likely working with triangle geometry that predated Pythagoras by over 1,000 years. Who needs a Greek when you've got priests with calculators made of rope? The architects drew out plans on papyrus, on stone slabs, or directly into the ground. They used wooden pegs and string to trace out giant squares that would eventually become the pyramid base. Every side, every angle, every stone had purpose. Even the pyramid's height had symbolic meaning. It connected the pharaoh to the sun god Ra. The entire shape mimicked the rays of the sun, reaching down from the heavens. This wasn't architecture, this was cosmic engineering. Because when your client is divine, the floor plan better impress the gods. Okay, blueprints? Check. Divine math? Double check. Now it's time to gather the ingredients for this ancient skyscraper. Spoiler alert, it's not your typical Home Depot run. We're talking millions of limestone blocks, some weighing more than a grand piano. So where'd they get them? Most of the core stones came from nearby quarries, like Giza's very own limestone buffet. Workers would carve out blocks with copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones, which basically means they bashed rock with other rock. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. But the really fancy stuff, that came from much farther. The polished white Tura limestone, used to cover the outside like a sacred shell, was hauled in from across the Nile, and the inner chambers. Some used granite from Aswan, over 500 miles south. Imagine hauling a 70-ton block upriver without trucks, cranes, or modern wheels. So how did they move it? Boats, big ones, and lots of them. The Nile was the OG highway, and during flood season, it flowed right up to Giza's doorstep. Blocks were loaded onto barges, floated downstream, then dragged across sleds greased with water or oil. Yes, water. Turns out the Egyptians figured out that wetting the sand reduced friction by up to 50%. Science before science. Then comes the most insane part. Over 2 million blocks were used for the Great Pyramid alone. That's a block laid every 2 to 3 minutes for 20 years straight. No union breaks, no Starbucks runs, just pure logistical muscle and sweat-soaked precision. And forget about slaves doing the dirty work. Evidence now points to well-fed, paid laborers, skilled crews who lived in purpose-built villages and literally built their legacy stone by stone. This wasn't just construction. It was one of the greatest team projects in human history. All right, so we've got the blocks, we've got the workers. Now, how the heck do you stack 2.3 million limestone bricks into a 480-foot-tall triangle without cranes, forklifts, or Elon Musk? Welcome to ancient Egypt's ultimate leg day. The truth is, historians are still debating this. But the leading theory, ramps. Lots and lots of ramps. Straight ramps, zigzag ramps, circular ramps. It was the golden age of ancient scaffolding. One theory even suggests they built a spiral ramp around the pyramid as it rose, kind of like a giant stone parking garage. These ramps were made from mud brick, limestone chippings, and rubble, basically whatever was lying around. Workers dragged blocks up these inclines using sleds and ropes, pulling with muscle, rhythm, and maybe a few good chants. Picture dozens of sweaty humans chanting in unison, sliding a 5,000-pound block up a sloped runway in 100-degree heat. Not exactly your average Tuesday. And get this, as the pyramid got taller, the ramps had to get longer, otherwise the incline would have been too steep. That means some ramps may have stretched over a mile long just to keep the slope manageable. It was slow, it was backbreaking, but it was genius in its simplicity. As each layer was completed, crews would smooth and fit the stones so precisely, some gaps are thinner than a credit card. That's ancient craftsmanship. No mortar, just gravity, friction, and centuries of patience. And when the last stone was finally placed, the whole outer layer gleamed in the sun, covered in polished Tura limestone. The pyramid didn't just sit in the desert, it shined, like a beacon to the gods. So next time you struggle with IKEA furniture, remember, ancient Egyptians built the world's most iconic monument with no power tools, just grit, genius, and a few million rocks. So you've stacked a few million limestone blocks, polished the whole thing to a mirror shine, and now your pyramid is looking like the Burj Khalifa of the Bronze Age. But here's the real question. Where's the pharaoh going? Because let's be clear, this wasn't just a fancy pile of rocks. It was a tomb, a cosmic launch pad for the soul, a deluxe afterlife condo carved with spells and booby traps. Inside, hidden deep beneath all that weight, was the king's chamber, a room so precise some researchers think it was engineered to withstand tectonic shifts. How did they get those 50-ton granite beams in place? Magic? Aliens? Probably just more ramps, patience, and joints that could carry a civilization. Now about those traps. Sorry, Indiana Jones fans, no flying spears or rolling boulders, but what they did have was psychological warfare, secret passageways, false doors, dead-end shafts. They wanted you confused, lost, and ideally, cursed. And don't forget the hieroglyphic graffiti. Yeah, the workers left their mark too. Some crew names included the Drunkards of Menkaure and the Friends of Khufu. Apparently, even pyramid crews loved a good inside joke. The walls inside were covered with spells from the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings on Earth. These weren't decorations. These were instructions for how the pharaoh could navigate the afterlife, dodge demons, and join the sun god Ra in his celestial cruise across the sky. And after all that, they sealed it up, smoothed out the stone, erased the entrances. The whole point was to hide the treasure, even if it meant nobody ever saw it again. So no, the pyramid wasn't just a burial. It was a masterpiece of mystery, a statement that said, I'm going out in style, eternally. Okay, so you've spent decades hauling stones, engineering chambers, and crafting an eternal stairway to the stars. But here's the kicker. How did the ancient Egyptians know this thing would last for millennia? Because, spoiler alert, they weren't just building for the next 100 years. They were building for eternity. First, let's talk location. These geniuses didn't just throw a dart at a map and start digging. They chose the Giza Plateau, a rock-solid foundation of bedrock that could handle the insane weight of the pyramid without sinking or shifting. If they'd built it on sand, the whole thing would have ended up like a lopsided birthday cake in the sun. Then there's the alignment. The Great Pyramid is almost perfectly aligned with the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, off by only a fraction of a degree. They used tools as simple as plumb bobs and sun shadows, yet somehow managed the kind of accuracy NASA would envy. Some even say they mapped the stars into stone. And materials. They didn't skimp. Limestone for the outer casing, granite for the king's chamber, and copper chisels replaced every time they wore down. This wasn't quick and dirty. It was precision work. They even thought about erosion. Those angled sides, not just stylish. They deflect wind and rain. Meanwhile, tightly packed joints between the stones keep water from seeping in. These were blocks meant to endure sandstorms, sun, and time itself. The result? A structure that survived wars, earthquakes, looters, and centuries of tourists trying to climb it for Instagram clout. And maybe that's the real genius. The pharaohs didn't just build tombs. They built messages in stone that still speak 4,500 years later. So here we are, 4,500 years later, and the pyramids are still standing. No Wi-Fi, no steel beams, no cranes, just raw human grit, celestial calculations, and a vision that outlived empires. But the real question isn't how they built the pyramids anymore. It's why they still matter. Because long after the dynasties fell and the pharaohs were stripped from their gold and glory, those pyramids remained, rising out of the desert like time machines made of stone. Tourists visit, scientists debate, conspiracy theorists draw triangles and point to aliens. But deep down, we're all just awestruck. Why? Because the pyramids are proof. Proof that humans, even thousands of years ago, could dream at a scale that defied their tools, their time, and even their mortality. They weren't just stacking blocks. They were making a point. We were here, and we mattered. Every stone tells a story, not just of kings, but of laborers, priests, architects, and craftsmen. The pyramid was a national project, one that unified Egypt in its golden age. It was science, religion, labor, and politics, all rolled into one impossible shape. Even today, they inspire engineers, architects, and artists. We still use phrases like building a pyramid when talking about big, impossible dreams. The legacy isn't just limestone, it's psychological, aspirational, a permanent reminder that humans once reached for the heavens with nothing but ropes, ramps, and relentless will. And maybe the real pyramid wasn't the structure, maybe it was the process, the ability to turn vision into reality, one block at a time. So the next time you feel like your goals are too big, just remember, someone once decided to build a mountain from scratch, in the desert, to touch eternity. That's the power of the pyramids. If this blew your mind even half as much as the pyramids blew ours, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your favorite pyramid fact in the comments. Until next time, stay curious and dream colossal.